All right, welcome back to the Nexus Podcast. We're here with Black Hat, and joining me today is Rui Ataide, the Managing Security Consultant at GuidePoint Security. Rui, we're going to talk about ransomware and spend some time talking about ransomware negotiations and kind of the landscape. And Rui's going to bring us inside that process. So great to meet you.
Great to meet you too. Thank you.
Thanks for joining me. I think this is going to be a fascinating discussion.
Should be. Everyone finds ransomware interesting.
For sure. So before we talk about like some of the games that you guys deal with, a lot of my audience manages cyber physical systems, whether it's on the industrial or the healthcare side. And I know industrial ransomware really isn't like a specific thing. It kind of affects the enterprise network, and then there's a trickle over. But healthcare certainly is an issue. Just kind of talk about the ongoing impact of ransomware on hospitals. Is it abiding? Is it getting worse? What's your take there?
Sure. There's a couple of sort of avenues to that, right? There's the impact directly to the physical systems. As I said, we can talk about a couple of those. I think that the biggest impact is just the sort of under the scene or behind the scenes operational and support systems, like people not being able to schedule an MRI or an X-ray because the computers from the hospital are all impacted, or the backend infrastructure that supports that is impacted. As said, we've seen in the past in some cases where physical systems actually also get directly affected because they have older systems that may be vulnerable to certain things. And then again, we had a couple of years ago, not directly ransomware, but ransomware related, an hospital that had a lot of problems because their X-ray machines were based on Windows 7, and they were also vulnerable to WannaCry. And someone 5 years later brought in a WannaCry USB disk, and then all of a sudden, all of the X-ray machines started going offline. It became a pain because to rebuild those, it's a manual process. They need to go back to manufacturing. The manufacturers sometimes don't have a process in place to do all those things. So we see a bit of that, but not as much as the effect to the normal IT systems that support sort of the hospital services.
There can be kind of a logjam there with the manufacturers, right?
Correct. Yes.
And these hospitals stay exposed for extended periods, unfortunately.
Correct. Exactly. And then the fact that these machines are present on the network and they're not easy to operate, as said, right? The even just fixing the system or changing the system, getting a new X-ray machine, for example, it's just not a trivial process. And so those systems are present on their networks for a long time, and it can also be leveraged as a foothold to, further entrench and progress the attack, right? It's a vulnerable machine that's connected to the network, it's connected to the domain, and so attackers will find those and use them as a way of activating privileges and obtaining credentials, so that they can, again, not necessarily targeting them per se, but using them as an advantage to their ultimate goal.
So, and just to ask the obligatory OT question, we haven't seen any ransomware samples specifically targeting OT. Is it the nature of OT that works in its favor in this respect, where there's just too many proprietary protocols and systems to make it worth it for the attacker?
True. It's always hard to find out what the reason is behind the criminal mind, but I would tend to agree with you on that probably targeting a couple of systems that actually the impact is more physical and probably raises more awareness and more attention to ransomware affiliates than anything else. It's not sometimes in their interest. I mean, again, we've had over the years a number of groups that specifically said they wouldn't target healthcare, they wouldn't target certain types of things. There was a lot of backlash when some of these groups end up attacking children's hospitals, and we had there'd been patient casualty and things like that. That obviously creates some level of bad publicity towards these gangs that doesn't help them. In the end, whether we like it or not, they do try and operate as a business. They try to keep their brands as clean is probably not the right term, but as appealing as possible, right? And no one wants to be the person that had to pay the ransomware affiliate that caused some child's death or something like that.
Sure.
So again, I think they're a bit cautious on that. on that side of things, to not raise too much attention to themselves, to not get on the radar of law enforcement for attacking critical infrastructure and things like that. We've seen some cases where the goal is to attack critical infrastructure and to get that type of approach, but it's not as much ransomware driven as it's somewhat more nation state under the guise of ransomware, I feel, or we feel. So that's probably why you don't see them targeting those systems that much, right?
Mm-hmm.
We've seen a shift, for instance, in terms even of ransomware, of no longer sort of targeting individual workstations or things like that, right?
Sure.
They target just the servers or the virtual infrastructure where they can actually inflict the largest amount of pain in the shortest period of time.
Mm-hmm.
Again, we could talk about a number of stories outside of that, just in general. Again, we've had a case recently where they pretty much attacked 300 ESX servers and all the entire infrastructure was down. And that was very crippling to the organization, and
right.
It's very painful to recover from. And so that gives the ransomware attackers a bigger interest, because the motivation then from the victim side of things, if we can call them that, is to really negotiate and get that decryptor, get that ability to be able to be back online as quick as possible,
sure.
right? As you can imagine, if someone has even backup for 300 systems, recovering from backup of 300 systems, it's not going to be
sure.
a quick and easy step.
So that's the quandary, though, is you've got law enforcement saying don't pay. You've got the security research community saying don't pay. But the reality is, businesses are losing real money. Hospitals are not able to treat patients. It's a very difficult discussion. I mean, I'm sure you have some insight there.
Correct, it is. I think we all agree that the business model only works if people pay, and if no one paid, it would stop to exist. I don't know that it would really stop to exist. I think we would just be pushing those payments to sort of a less clear approach and less clear process. And so we don't tend to tell people pay or don't pay. We try to advise them on the advantages or disadvantages. We even recommend that people engage to try and leverage as much information from these operators, whether they're ultimately paying or not,
mm-hmm.
right? Just again, to find out what information is taken, how critical is that to the business,
right?
And things like that. The recovery side of things is the critical point in the decision, right? Again, it ends up being a business decision, right? Can you recover from this quickly? How much is that going to cost you in terms of revenue, in terms of operational costs? And we're getting some clearer messages, if you like, around those, where again, recently, for instance, if we talk about the supermarket chains in the UK, they had very clear numbers of how much money they were losing on a weekly basis.
Wow, yeah.
Right? To kind of, again, the amount of money that they